Okay, thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it. I guess you guys can hear me. You can see the screen, so I guess we can get going here. So today I'd like to give you an overview of my paper, Can Adopting a Shift-Left Approach to Testing Shift-Left Too Far? As a side note, the paper is the original source for all the material in the presentation. So the presentation is not available for download, but the paper is. So all the material you'll see here, that's all in the paper. Please download the paper when you get a chance. Thanks. This is a topic I'm sure many of you have you already know about, but as I thought about shift-left testing, I first wanted to understand its origins so I could better understand its intent. Shift-left testing was a concept put forth in an article in a long since defunct magazine I remember all too well. The article was one man's perspective on making testing more cost-effective, while at the same time increasing the collaboration between testing and development. My concern as I researched was that the focus became more and more on automation, focusing on increasing the developer's role in testing. Of course, only good can come from that, right? I started coding in an era where developers couldn't test their own code. This automation focus seemed to emanate from the test automation pyramid introduced by Mike Cohn, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. As a software engineer and former manager of testing, I was curious how shift-left testing was seen from an SDLC perspective, and I ran across Donald Firesmith's blog post about shift-left testing and how it could be adopted. With these two perspectives, I wanted to see what gaps might be present in a shift-left testing program. Software development organizations are always looking for ways to improve the software development process. Over the past 20 years, agile methods have helped improve software development by getting developers closer to the customer. But another process improvement, shift-left testing, was introduced at about the same time to get testers closer to developers. Shift-left testing was introduced to move testing from a reporting function to a cooperative effort with development to find bugs earlier. This early definition of shift-left testing was centered on moving testing closer to development, but a later model continued testing's shift further to the left to ideation and requirements. The shift-left testing has had the additional benefit of making developers more responsible for the quality of code. However, moving testing left may have had the unintended, or maybe in some cases intended, consequence of reducing the role of the tester. I had first mentioned my use of the V model in the introduction. We remember the days of waterfall. Maybe some of us remember the days of waterfall, where we cascaded from user needs to implementation and coding. Each step of the process had its corresponding testing step later. And by later, I mean much later, after the software is built. And certainly in acceptance and operational testing, you are very nearly ready to ship the product. Remember, Larry Smith proposed shift-left testing to squash bugs early in the process, but testing before you ship is not early in the process. The other model I am using is a pretty familiar test automation pyramid. From the post on Mountain Goat Software, Mike Cohn provides some additional context to the test automation pyramid from his book, Succeeding with Agile. He writes about testing these three layers, UI, service, and unit, to provide guidance on how much and where to focus. It's amazing how these very simple depictions can take on a life of their own. I include this because of the emphasis on automation and generally how automation is considered in the domain of the developer. Like Smith, Cohn wants to be clear that automation is critical to a successful program, but his pyramid is focused on automation. Cohn's pyramid makes two important points. There should be less focus on this. There should be more focus on the service layer and less focus on the UI layer, where it is brittle and expensive to test. The gap I believe Cohn is trying to fill is that we could more strategically plan testing between service and UI layer. He's also trying to show how UI testing should not be the focal point of the testing strategy. I'm not sure all companies have gotten that message. The increased emphasis on automated testing may lead some organizations to conclude that testers are not necessary. However, testers provide key insights through exploratory testing and collaboration with development. Scripts by their nature can only cover so much of the software, no matter how many scripts are written. exploratory tests cover these gaps, but more importantly, the collaboration between developers and testers provide increased coverage right from the beginning. That was conclusion. So I'd like to thank, that was the entire paper. I don't know how much, if anybody had any questions on that. I would like to thank the PNSQC for giving me the opportunity to write the paper and then present today. And thanks to Ying King Guan and Corey Matty for reading and reviewing the paper. Any questions out there, Rachel?
Not at this point, but I'll keep you posted.
Okay. Okay, then that's very quick. Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it.
All right, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or even just speak up now. And then also, if people think of questions later, is there a great place for people to reach out to you, Dave? Or are you on LinkedIn or anything?
I am on LinkedIn, and I can be found at, I'll put my email address in the chat.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, and let me look at my notes quick. I thought I maybe had one question or comment. You may have already mentioned this, but everybody should keep in mind that the papers are accessible out there. So I believe they're on either the website or you received an email with a link that should get you to all the papers. So I'd encourage you to go read through this paper if you haven't already, and then maybe reach out to Dave later on with any questions that come up as well. But thank you very much. Nice job.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Dave, this is Katie. I had a question for you, and you maybe touched on it, but how within your role or at your company are you kind of like, I guess, combating this trend towards shift lefting, meaning just developers test everything? Like what? So because I fully agree with the concept, and I've had many questions and conversations with people around this, but like, what do you do to reverse that once you see it happening?
Great question. I actually, I lead a team, software developers. So we do talk through testing strategies in our team. I'm both Scrum Master, project manager, and technical manager for a software development team. And my Scrum team part, which is the same people, there are no testers. All we have just developers and product owner. Interestingly enough, we also have a UI person and a copywriter, but still no testing. So we do talk through testing strategies. We do talk through, I want to make sure that they are, that they're writing proper unit tests, that they're doing their end-to-end testing. But I've given this paper off to some folks that are working on a more comprehensive strategy in the company, and hoping that will have some impact as well. Actually, prior to my role as the technical manager, I was in audit, so I got a chance to kind of see how that was going across the company. And there are varying degrees of involvement. Vanguard's always trying to improve the process, the development process. Like as I said, I'm sure most companies are trying to improve it in some way. And they tend to experiment with different models of doing that. So we'll continue to keep an eye out, see how things are going, and I'll continue to talk to the folks who are developing these models.
Nice. Yeah, I see Moss is adding some comments to the chat that are kind of similar. Moss, I think I've actually heard about it from the reverse, or I remember when I moved out here hearing like Microsoft got rid of all their testers, right? Because just everyone does everything. And so, I feel like it can be very like polar understanding depending on where you're coming from or where you heard about it. But like Dave was talking about, like it's taken these two forks.
Right. The keynote speaker earlier today mentioned how some companies are, thinking that they could just get rid of the testers, or he mentioned also the shift left testing. I think what the reason I wrote the paper in the first place was because I could see shift left. If you just read that part of it, shift left testing, and you maybe cursory glance through the paper, then you can think, oh, well, we can just shift all the testing to the developers and it's perfectly fine. But Larry Smith is really trying to get much deeper than that. It wasn't about the task of testing, but rather shifting the process that way, taking the testers with the process. And then I like Donald Firesmith's viewpoint on this as well, where he says, if you look at the model-based approach, now you're looking at testers really testing from the very beginning. And there are some places, where they have to do that, like medical devices, for example, you have to do formative and summative human factors testing. And typically in any consumer web or website or mobile device company, they're going to do user needs testing. They'll do user testing, but that will also depend, somewhere in the process. I think there is some value to Scrum where you can, get A/B testing going and try different experiments. We do a lot of that, but that was the whole reason I wrote the paper, was that my concern about just the concept of moving all the testing to development and saying, oh well, we don't need testers anymore.
Nice. And I think you may have mostly hit on this already, but Moss's question about how prevalent is the idea that shift left is to get rid of testers, and what sort of forms does that take? Any further words of wisdom to share on that?
No, that's a great question. I was trying to do a little bit of research on, how prevalent something like this is. I did, in listening to the keynote speaker this morning, it seemed to hit me that it is a thing, at least, not just me. But it would be good, I think, maybe, to follow along with this paper, doing some research might be interesting. I think the advent of test-driven development also is kind of spurring that movement, because now we can write our test before the coding, so that must mean all the testing is done. But I think that Martin Fowler and Hamzak did some writing about this, a couple of years ago, and they talked about the kind of the missing pieces in the test automation pyramid, but also the fact that you can't just get rid of the exploratory testing piece of it. So no, I think doing some more research in there would be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. Kind of speaks to that. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Concept of testing just magically being done. We have another great question in the chat from Jackie. If your team has no testers, how do you deal with conflict of interest when developers test their own code?
We do code reviews, we do code reviews, and we do testing reviews. So so somebody else on the team will review the developer's code in the test that they ran on the code. And then we also we like to have another person on the team do the testing. So we'll switch that up as well. So if one person writes the code, then another person will do the testing. We have a separate testing column, so at least we know it's been moved from development's complete to testing, and then of course our product owner will take a look at it at that point too. But we continue to develop our end-to-end tests as we go forward. There's quite a few additional tests that are required of the software before it goes out. And so we continue to kind of wrap these new testing techniques into the process.
Awesome. And I just have to read this one out loud because I love this. Mia says that she likes that collaborative, but maintains accountability, which that was striking me too. It sounds like your team strikes a really cool balance between working together well, but also holding each other accountable and maintaining quality.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know our senior developers also have a very quality focus, high quality focus on the software as well. So we have a good mix between junior folks and senior folks.
Awesome. Can I hit you with a slightly left field question?
Absolutely.
My thinking was more, are there pieces of testing that shouldn't be pulled left? So are there ways that testers might do some risk analysis to determine if testing can safely shift left or not? And are there any best practices that you encountered there? Or is there always an opportunity to shift left and it's just a matter of making sure that it doesn't, we don't fall into this myth of, well, the developer tested it, so we're done.
Right. No, I think it's just certain elements of testing that would be shifting left, and certainly when we say shift left, I want to be clear that the way I read the article was that you're really shifting the tester left. So you're not losing you shouldn't be losing any of the testing that the tester is doing. And as a matter of fact, you're increasing the amount of cooperation that the developer is getting from the tester. I've seen this throughout my career, and Larry Smith talks about the combativeness sometimes between development and testing. What do you mean you found a bug in my code? What do you mean that's a requirement, or that's not a requirement? And I had a great story a couple of years ago. I worked with a group in Brazil when I was at Johnson & Johnson, and I went to visit them, and they said in the development they had a great interaction between the developers and the testers would give the developers scenarios for their unit tests, and that's the kind of thing I think that is helpful. So I don't think I hope this is answering your question. I don't think you're losing anything. I think what you're doing by shifting left is actually gaining. You're getting the testers' knowledge, professional skepticism, moving them into other areas where they hadn't been before. Probably not coding automation tests. That's something that I think both Smith and I agree that if you're a developer, you can write those tests, right? But it's much easier when somebody gives you what the test should be, so you don't have to think of that on your own.
Very cool. It sounds like this is almost a culture shift or a breaking down of that historic silo where developers are on one side and testers on the other, and there's
right.
a little bit of animosity.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, Rachel. Thank you.
Nice. All right. Any last questions from anyone? I encourage you to check out the chat. I see a good link from us. Oh, awesome.
One thing I just wanted to throw in, I don't know if people have strong feelings about this, but there's always the debate about testing versus checking. And it seems like unit testing is really about checking that nothing is broken versus testing, which is expanding what you're looking at and thinking about it. I think the link that I shared, well, I don't have a quote for it, but checking is really, we know what we have and we still know that it's still working, versus testing is kind of exploring and expanding the scope of what you know. And so really part of the shifting left isn't checking. It's more about, getting in there and testing, is this requirement valid? Is this even, can we implement it? Does the model work this way? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's and I think again, like I said, the earlier keynote speaker mentioned this as well. I think what we're not doing is we're really not doing a lot of testing in those early stages, the unit testing. It's like you said, more checking to make things are working the way they're exactly supposed to. But there's no outside the box thinking. There's maybe not a lot of parameter boundaries, anything like that. And I think that's what you have to watch for.
I'd kind of disagree with that though, because it's a lot more difficult to implement. But there are ideas like mutation testing that start adding those outside the box things just to see if your tests are covering all these oddball scenarios that you didn't talk about earlier.
Right. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Hi. I think the challenge of, not shifting quality to the left and not hiring testers really comes in when you're working with really, really large, complex programs of work, such as when you have a bank that's replacing their front-end CRM their middleware, their core banking system. They're upgrading their app, they're upgrading their internet banking, they're upgrading their website, and they're doing it all within a relatively short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 years, which for that many systems is pretty intense. And I find that the strategizing, the planning, the tracking of the testing, particularly making sure users get involved early on, and then looking at designing and tracking more end-to-end tests that cut across all the systems. You can automate that to a certain extent, but sometimes the cost of automating that much testing, or rather testing that many systems at once, to make sure that data flows from the front end to the back end and back again correctly. Sometimes it can be a little bit cheaper, at least, to engage users to do that testing. It's difficult to get them involved early enough, especially if you don't have, quality-minded people or test-minded people that know how to communicate and interact with the end users and people from the business. I think that's really where the importance of testers shifting left and getting users involved earlier really comes in, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with, I think, everything you said there. The one thing I would add, and I didn't touch on it, I just barely touched on this point, and something I would like to look at a little bit deeper is that with Cohen's blog post where he's trying to, I think, clarify the test automation pyramid from his book, he's really trying to say we've forgotten about the service layer. We can do all the unit tests we want on the beginning part. We can try to create these UI tests, and I'm sure everybody's here has heard about the ice cream cone effect. But the service layer, I think you could potentially work a program out where if you test the service layer pretty thoroughly, and then you can coordinate that testing with the UI. So you could then do more targeted UI and end-to-end testing approach. So Martin Fowler likes to, as far as I can tell, likes to take the UI piece out and put in end-to-end testing. I think that's really two different things. To me, it's two different things, especially coming from the medical device field, because you have to test the UI so that people can use the UI itself versus the whole end-to-end process things. It's two completely different things. But if we think about that service layer, and then we go to the UI or the end-to-end test, we could definitely work it out. So I think that you could do that more targeted UI / end-to-end test if you know what you're testing in service layer.
Yeah, good call. Completely agree.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think if I think about all the different variations of questions or answers, it's kind of coming back to what you were saying, Dave, is that you're bringing the tester in earlier. And whether it be you don't have dedicated testers at your team, but you're training your developers and you're having one of them act as the tester during that, or whether you're bringing in users earlier in the process and they are acting as the tester, like you are bringing in someone whose focus is the testing of what's going to be done into the first, because you can't wear multiple hats at every stage and actually do it all well.
Yeah, I think that's that last part was exactly right. You can try, but you don't always do it well. And most likely, if you're trying to do all those things, you're not going to do it well. So no, that's a really good point, Katie. Yeah, I love the way you guys think. No, I mean, I learned. Personally, I manage testers. I've learned an awful lot from testers. I think working with folks who are professional testers for me was a real eye opener. And so, I'm a big fan, frankly.